Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Austin McNulty, and today I'm going to be discussing case number 2, more particularly how a human resources manager would handle a grievance. Next slide, please. So, case number 2, the overview on it is essentially the Picasso company was going to be hiring a first shift leader. Now, 2 people applied for the job. The first one was Mr. Elder. Mr. Elder had already had leadership experience in that company. He was senior. He had leadership on the second and third. He was a team leader, and he was also a machinist first class. Now, the second person who actually got the job was Mr. Younger. Mr. Younger did not have the seniority. He had never actually made machinist first class, but that was due because there wasn't an open vacancy. So he was selected as the first shift manager, and therefore Mr. Elder filed a grievance. Next slide, please. So as the human resources manager, I think it's important for you to know what your responsibilities are if you're going to be fighting a grievance from a union worker or even just an employee in general. So according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, a human resources manager coordinates organization workforces, oversees employee benefits, oversees recruitment of employees, labor relations director, and employee relations director. So essentially what that means is everything to do with the hiring, the interviewing, maintaining the regulations, and the stipulations, anything that comes with employing union union employees, you're responsible for. Next slide, please. So the grievance. Mr. Elder, he filed a grievance and claims that it violated the collective bargaining agreement by not giving him full consideration for his seniority. Now, in my opinion, that was not true because of 20.1 and 20.4 in the collective bargaining agreement, as you can see in the textbook. Next slide, please. So 20.1 says that you have to give 3 days for anybody who wants to apply for the position to apply for the position. And then you can apply on the basis of seniority, but also on ability to perform the job. On the end of the 3rd day, the job will be filled by the employee who is the most qualified as soon as possible. And then section 20.4 says the company will give full consideration to seniority qualifications of employees. Now, to me, this is a clause in the collective bargaining agreement which helps to protect the employer itself. Just because there's seniority, you still have to have the best ability and you have to work best for the company. So next slide, please. So the employer's right. Just because you're the employer doesn't mean that you don't have rights. A union contract or bargaining agreement does not trump the employer's rights. Now, the United States, being the free market that it is, there aren't a whole lot of regulations or stipulations that keep employees from being fired, and that's some of the appeal of a union, is it makes them harder to get rid of. That being said, if the senior applicant doesn't perform as well as the younger one, then you go off of abilities and qualifications. And that's the rights of the employer is, yes, you do have to follow the collective bargaining agreement and you do want to give preference to seniority, but if that senior person is not the best person for the job, then you move on and you pick the person who's most qualified. Next slide, please. So the performance during the interview. It discussed that both the manager and the human resources manager, Mrs. Murphy, interviewed the people, and they found that Mr. Younger was more qualified. He was qualified to be a machinist first class, but once again, there were no vacancies. But the biggest things were his leadership abilities. They found in the interview process that he had better intercommunication or interpersonal skills. That's important because any leader needs to be able to communicate. There's no substitution for good communication. Secondly is he took initiative. Now, any company is also going to say that a leader needs to be proactive or take initiative. You don't need to be told to do stuff. If you see something that is wrong, you need to go ahead and act on it and fix the problem. And Mr. Younger showed that he was taking initiative, that he had better communication skills, and looked like he was going to be a better fit, or was going to be a better fit, for the first shift supervisor or leader. Next slide, please. As the human resources manager, as we've discussed in the last few slides, you've got to make sure you stick to your guns. Don't be intimidated by a grievance process or a union. Laws work for the union just as much as they work for the company, if not more. Be willing to fight for what you think is right. If you think the person that was most qualified is not the senior, make sure you keep documents that are proving that from the interview processes. That way you can show when they are getting their union representatives to argue their case of that grievance, you can bring documentation to verify, look, what I did was right. I understand that they weren't the senior person, but they scored better, or they interviewed better, or they performed better, in this certain spot. So make sure you keep records of that. And last is the steward representation. So sticking to your guns, the steward might not actually want to represent that grievance if they feel that that grievance is going to hurt other union workers. So if it's not a justified grievance, do they have the right to file it? Absolutely. But is the steward going to put his neck out and potentially risk harming other union employees for a grievance that he doesn't believe in? Probably not. Next slide, please. So in summary, we discussed that Mr. Younger was more qualified, and that's why he got the job. You were justified in hiring the person that is the most qualified and that is going to be the best fit for the job. And as a company, you have rights just like the union does. So stick to your guns, do what you think is right, and by making sure that the company has hired the most qualified person, you're also helping out the other union members, because it's going to keep your company around. If the company fails, the union members, regardless of whether they got their grievance or not, they're not going to have a job if that company fails. So stick to your guns, do what's right for the company, and you're not going to be wrong. Next slide, please. So these are all the references. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great day.